series. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Amanda Cabanillas. I am the Education and Outreach Coordinator at Greene County Soil and Water Conservation District. As many of you know, this is the third year that we are offering the webinar series as part of Schoharie Watershed Month. It's been really wonderful to support the evolution of this programming, so thank you again for joining us and learning this evening. Some of the previous year's webinars have been uploaded to our YouTube channel, and you're welcome to go check those out anytime so you can kind of follow along in our journey. Schoharie Watershed Month is a month-long series of free community events that celebrate and raise awareness of the waterways that flow across the Schoharie Reservoir watershed, as well as the 315 square miles of land across Greene, Schoharie, and Delaware counties that feed them. Following this evening's program, we still have 2 more Schoharie Watershed Month offerings. These include one more bonus June Watershed Wednesday webinar next Wednesday, as well as the 3rd annual Mountaintop Bio Blitz celebration at the Mountaintop Arboretum in Tannersville this Saturday. The BioBlitz celebration features a full day of plant, insect, and fungi identification walks, as well as a wildlife show. The forecast is showing that it may be a little chilly and drizzly that day, but that just seems to be the trend for Saturdays in May 2025. But we're going to have a great time regardless, so I encourage you to join us if you're available. Information about these events can be found on the homepage of our website. That's gcswcd.com, or you can feel free to contact me directly with any questions that you have. These programs are all offered for free to the watershed community and have been made possible by the Schoharie Watershed Stream Management Program, which is a partnership between Greene County Soil and Water Conservation District and the New York City Department of Environmental Protection. This evening's session, The Deep Time History of the Schoharie Watershed, will be presented by Dr. Chuck Ver Straeten. Chuck Ver Straeten is a sedimentary rock geologist at the New York State Museum. He studies various rocks and fossils of the Devonian Period in New York State and beyond. He is both a geological detective and deep time historian of Earth and life between 420 and 380 million years ago. You'll see him along road cuts, streams, and mountainsides studying the rocks. His main research examines the Devonian rocks of the Catskills, including Earth's oldest fossil forests. In addition, he is also an improvising musician, inventing music and sound on the spot. This presentation will last a little over an hour, and we'll also be taking questions at the end. Please feel free to use the chat or the Q&A box to submit questions. If using the chat box, please make sure that the chat is set to go to everyone so we can all see. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to you, Chuck. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thanks for the invitation. Thanks for the invitation, Amanda. Yeah. Hi, everybody. Chuck here. I live up in Western Albany County, and you heard the rest about this from Amanda. So anyway, let's go ahead and get started. I'm a geologist, and I focus in the Devonian period, which is a time from, I'm just going to round it up, 420 to 360 million years ago. That's 60 million years of time. And if you think about the extinction of the dinosaurs 65 million years ago, okay, that is quite an amount of time. That's 60 million years of time. And a lot of my focus in the past was in the marine rocks of the Devonian in New York and up and down the Appalachian Basin. These years, the last dozen years especially, have been much more focused on these rocks in the Catskills, which were deposited not in shallow seas, a few hundred feet deep at most, but in the terrestrial rocks that are found, the oldest ones east just around the Catskill area, going west of Catskill itself. And then continue up to Slide Mountain, the highest peak, and also down into Pennsylvania and western New York. All right. Anyway, yeah, I'll just get going. All right. the Schoharie Watershed. And I have a couple images here. Here is a nice one of the complete watershed of Schoharie Creek here. And we are focusing in the upper part of it, especially since this is where the Schoharie watershed related to Schoharie Reservoir is right here. So we're really examining mostly the area down through here. I'm going to touch on a couple spots here and here a little bit, but here we go. Here is that more restricted area of the watershed related to Schoharie Reservoir by Gilboa right there. And if you're on a small screen like a phone, you might want to trade to something else because I have some details things. And this whole area of the Schoharie Valley and Schoharie Watershed has been classic New York geology and paleontology since the 1820s. And actually, it's known globally to some degree. We actually brought an international group of Devonian experts, geologists, and paleontologists. That It was a meeting for 11 days. In the last 3 days, we were in the vicinity from Cherry Valley to the top of the Catskill Escarpment. Many stops out of 11 days, 2 days of meetings. Anyway, moving on. There you go. This is from a friend of mine and Danny Davis, who will be talking next week, who's here tonight, from when we were all undergraduates together down at SUNY New Paltz. And he took this in the, I don't know, the 20 teens, perhaps. Do you see what you see there? Do you know what you're seeing? Much of that, but not all of it, but much of it from the center to the north is in the Schoharie watershed. Here is Platte Clove. Here is Catskill Clove. This is the ridge that makes the southeastern boundary, I guess we'd say, of the Schoharie watershed. Coming along here, the Devil's Path route through there, Catskill High Peak right here, etc. Going to move on. There's many things to talk about. All right, and I will just point out photo by Joe Gianelli in the lower part. Okay, geology and deep time. You know, one of the things that fascinated me in my mid to late 20s that got me into geology was thinking about time and the philosophical ramifications. Homo sapiens has been around for a pipsqueak of time. The first dinosaurs were about 230 million years ago. The rocks, say at Gilboa, are about three, 385, 383 million years old. No, actually about 385 million years old. So time is a very relative thing. This is a great one. This is the continents basically coming and oceans coming down through time. Human time, we measured in seconds to centuries. There's 5,000 years of written human history. My grandma DeCosta was born in 1888, and she was probably somewhere in her 20s or 30s before she saw her first automobile. Deep time is a very different thing. And this is where time is measured in tens of thousands to billions of years. The Earth and the solar system, as it says here, is about 4.6 billion years old. That's geologic time. All right, and here is the geologic time scale. This down here at the bottom on the left here, this whole scale at the bottom, that's the Earth forming about 4.55 billion years ago, about 4.6 billion years ago. And then time going from that about there all the way up to modern times right here, the Cenozoic right there. And then we're splitting this out, this time scale going through the whole history of the Earth to the time in the late part of what we call the Precambrian, so up in here, all the way up through modern time right here then. Okay. And this is what's known as the Paleozoic era, Mesozoic, the time of the dinosaurs, Cenozoic, the time dominated by mammals when we think of animals. Paleozoic, they were simple animals, but progressing um, along the way, beginning in the Devonian life, the first amphibians in the Devonian over here. The Devonian period is right there, and this is about 60 million years of time, 420 to 360 million years ago. And that's a lot of time, as I mentioned before. The Devonian period is known well for various things, and one of them is the first really abundant coral reefs in the Silurian period before the Devonian also. But here is a reconstruction of a Middle Devonian reef like there are found in Greene and Albany and Schoharie out to Otsego County, and then also again in Western New York and in the deep subsurface below the southern tier. But anyway, these are a lot of corals we see here. This is a coiled cephalopod, relation of a squid and some other things, little trilobites and shells there of brachiopods. All right, 60 million years long from that time, more precisely 419 to 359 million years ago. And the world was very different there. The position of the eastern United States was south of the equator. This is the equator going through the outline of modern North America, with cutting off some of Mexico. And where you see the brown here, that was a great mountain belt here. There was also a mountain belt forming out here and way up northern North America at that time. The goldish color, yellowish gold, that is where there were lowlands, and where there is light blue water, there is shallow marine waters, a few hundred feet at deep, and then the dark blue is the deep ocean waters. And again, the yellow lines, there's Alaska. This is just the outline of modern things. Iceland, sorry, Greenland right here. Okay, next. Um, in New York, we have various things. This is Taganic Falls in central New York, and we see middle to late Devonian rocks right through here, mostly shales down here. You're getting more sandstones as you get up into here. Formerly muds, uh, becoming shale, and then up higher, more sandstone, which was sand cemented together to form that. Some of the great fossils from New York. There's a beautiful trilobite right there, fake hops, and of course the Gilboa stumps. And then also the setting at that time, sorry, this is moving too fast sometimes. This is where we were out here. There were smaller continents from East Greenland down to Georgia colliding with eastern North America and being subducted down into the mantle below. And this created a great mountain belt by deformation and crushing rocks and building them up high. A mountain belt that was very high, we'll learn about. There was volcanism going on, rocks that were, come on, mouse, rocks that were in the mountain belt were under high pressure and high temperature, and you ended up getting metamorphic rocks there. Anyway, moving on. All right, this is one of my favorite images. Do you know what you see? Do you know what you're looking across? This is a view from someone from the California Geographic Survey that did a lot of images like this from around the world. But there is the Catskills. This is the Shawangums, or Shawangum as the locals know it largely. The Hudson River is over here. This is the Ashokan Reservoir. And I'm just going to run us through a number of different cities and villages. Catskill over here. This is Kingston. At the bottom down here, New Paltz. There's Ellenville. Out here is Oneonta in this view, and there's Schoharie. This is Woodstock, and Phoenicia is down in here. This is Catskill Clove. This is Platte Clove. There is Gilboa and the reservoir you can see in blue right there. Over here is Cairo. Well, I never got in trouble when I gave a talk at the Gilboa um, Museum because I was the one who made the original find at the Cairo quarry to find a quarry that had an older forest by about 2 to 3 million years older than Gilboa, which had been known as the quote oldest forest in the world for about 100 years. Okay, this image, I love this image. This is basically the Schoharie Watershed right through here. All right, let's proceed. The Catskills, about 385 million years ago. If we jumped into a time machine and went to the Catskills, where do you think we'd be? Over here? Down here? Ah, at that time, the Catskills were lowlands with rivers and floodplains um, coming off of the mountain belt from high up in the mountain belt the rocks broke down into pebbles and boulders and muds and sands. They were carried from the mountains out here in New England, a young and rugged mountain belt. And all that rock it was breaking down while the mountains continued to build up very high. Um, that's what created our Catskill Mountains nowadays. They've been uplifted over time to their current elevation and quite deeply eroded while that happened too, the Catskills. Some studies have shown that apparently 2.5 to 3 miles of rock were on top of Slide Mountain, the highest peak in the Catskills. All right, moving on. Everybody probably knows what you're looking at right there. This is the far northern end, basically, of the Schoharie Reservoir watershed. And we can see the Schoharie Creek coming in here and flowing into the Schoharie Reservoir. I have a series of Google Earth images here. Uh, yeah, you'll learn a lot from the coming slides. All right. This is from about 2 miles above the surface, and up is basically facing east. Now I'm going to change our perspective here. Okay, we are about still 2 miles above where we were just looking, but looking to the east, looking out to the east. To the right over here, we see the Catskill Mountains. In the distance, we see some bumps and jumps here that are, okay, and this is, sorry, I got to tell you, this is 3 times vertical exaggeration. I do this so that I can see the features more, but all of this elevation is 3 times the real elevation. Out here is the Appalachian Mountains, hidden by the Catskills over here from view. This is the Appalachian Mountains belt coming out along here. That is Mount Greylock, the highest peak in Massachusetts. That is 67 miles as a crow would fly from the south end of pardon me, of the Schoharie Reservoir. This is Huntersfield Mountain right there, for those of you who know. Yeah. All right, next. Oh, yes, and that is Wyndham. And here is the ski slopes. If anybody was skiing down that, you'd have to be very professional Very, very good skier at 3 times vertical exaggeration. Don't forget, we're going to be seeing images like that coming up. So that was there looking down at the Schoharie Watershed at the reservoir now. This is looking somewhere else in the world now. And again, 3 times exaggeration, so we can get a better sense of the difference. This is Santiago, Chile. This is the Andes Mountains. Can everybody see where it says Andes up there at the top, or is that getting cut off like it is on my screen?
I can see it.
Okay, okay, good.
Yep.
Just wanted to know. So that's the Andes Mountain. The peak, the high peak over there, I don't know how to pronounce it exactly, Aconcagua Mountain. That is 22,387 to 22,837 feet tall, 4.3 miles about. That is quite a mountain belt. Again, at 3 times exaggeration. And here is a non-exaggerated view of them, of the Andes Mountains. And look at the sharp peaks. Look at the sharpness. That is what New England was like back during the Devonian period, especially as it went into the late part of the Devonian period. A major, large mountain belt extending from East Greenland, and Danny has been there, all the way down to Alabama. From continent collisions, like the Himalayas have been built over the last 30 million years as India collided with southern Asia. This is young and rugged mountain belt indeed. Okay, today, a short distance west of Santiago is a view like this. And there's the mountains. Santiago is in this area right around here. The high peak is that one right there, I believe. And we're looking out from the continental shelf in this case, which is not deep ocean. Again, still 3 times exaggeration. Same view, but I just backed out looking in the same direction. Around 400 million years ago, during the Devonian period, eastern New York to central New England looked like this. Young, rugged mountains out there, part of a very long mountain belt that extended all along the quote east unquote coast of North or part of North America. And this is a view looking from the east, from eastern New York. And again, this is modern place in the world, different. There are some uh, Homo sapiens houses and things down here. But this is just to give you a sense of things. Instead of looking east, now we're looking west. And I grew up in Des Moines, Iowa. Des Moines, Iowa would be like that at this time. There was a shallow sea at most depths, a few hundred feet deep, that extended west of the modern Mississippi River. Ohio would be in this same seaway, and out here would be the Catskills. The Catskills, with all of that mud, sand, and gravel eroding off of the mountain belt, rivers were carrying sediment out into the seaway and filling it from the east to above sea level. Again, it's an on the continent seaway that was more, at most, a few hundred feet in depth, not oceanic depths at all, like the continental shelf. Okay, um, there we go, talking about that. The only example we have of something like this in North America, a shallow on the continent sea now, is the Hudson Bay. But much of the continents back in the Devonian and times before and after that were covered by shallow seas like this. All right, and here in the Catskills with Earth's oldest known forests. Okay, back to this again. And there's the Catskills. There's the Shawangunks. Yep. Um, and then the different places we talked about here, and Schoharie there, Phoenicia here. Here is our watershed that we're talking about tonight, going down to the Schoharie Reservoir, that blue patch right there. This is where the water power hydroelectric project is downstream from Gilboa. And that'll come to our attention a little bit. The two Cloves, Gilboa itself. All right. Again, our image here, the Catskills were the lowlands, and rivers were carrying mud and sand and gravel out of those rugged mountains, carrying them by the very late Devonian. Some of those muds even got carried as far west as Iowa. Anyway, all right, massive amounts of sediment coming off the mountains from New England, coming down into New York, coming into what became the Catskills, and over into the Midwest, even eventually. And this is something that geologists use. This is like stacking all of the rocks that you would find from the exit to get onto the thruway by Catskill in Greene County, all the way to the big stack of the rocks to the top of Slide Mountain. And that's the way geologists look at things as one big cliff to understand the stratigraphy as the different types of rocks occur. The brown is for dark to black shales. The blues with the brick patterns are limestones. This is land, this is rocks that have red beds that were deposited on land. This is the upper marine sandstones, shallow water, and then it overfilled. Like it overfilled. Think of the seaway as if you have a puddle in your gravel driveway and you're shoveling gravel into it. You shovel it in from one side and keep shoveling farther and farther across the mud puddle until you fill it in. That's what the mountain was doing to the seaway. All right. The rocks, all of these rocks from the red up to the orange up here with a lot of gravel, a lot of pebbles in the rocks, some down here and very little gravel pebbles down here. All this is the rocks that make up the Catskills. And there's different names for these units, but we don't have to explore that at all. 1.6 miles thick, these rocks in the Catskills is the estimate. This all formed in a setting like this. This is what we would have as the mountains and the seaway, and we call this technically an alluvial plain. It doesn't matter. It's steeper up here, higher towards the mountains, and it gets lower and lower and flatter as you come out here. You can see the rivers moving across here, carrying a lot of sediment from the mountains out to the seaway and filling the shoreline to above sea level gradually, but all through time, moving, filling in the basin from this way, making the land go further and further west. Okay, all right, here's the rocks of the Catskills. And this is a great example of what you see. You've got bedrock here that's still attached to the earth. So bedrock in the Catskills is mostly sandstones, sand that's cemented together, and these things, which are mostly shale, although shale, which used to be mud, sometimes it's shale, and sometimes thin sandstones would also be carried out into this environment right here. And again, thinking about time, the oldest rocks are at the bottom here, and all of these different layers were deposited at a later and later time going up through these rocks. So this is a big ledge of sandstone. It stands out. It's very hard. It's cemented together very well. The rocks below are recessed because it's muds and muds that became shale. This is mostly muds down there. Mud that became shale is a weaker rock. And in those lower ones are paleosols. What is that? Paleo is ancient and sols is for soils. These are ancient soils, some of these in here. And on those ancient soils grew vegetation and things. Again, we're looking at our alluvial plain there. And the resistant sandstones you see in the upper part up here, those are sandstones that were deposited in a river channel carrying sand mostly, also mud, but in suspension, not along it wasn't being deposited here. The energy was too big in the river. And so that is a river channel. And then down here, these red beds that we see, the red layers were deposits when a river channel was not right here. This is going up Catskill Clove. Um, at that time, these were floodplains where the waters during floods would spread out both ways, long distances sometimes, from a river channel that at this time was somewhere else to the north or south. All right, I'm moving a little. This is an example of such a floodplain, although you would not have highlands to the side coming off the mountain belt. Yeah, so there's a floodplain alongside of a river channel, and during floods, this is great. You can see that the heavier particles, a lot of the sands, and if there's gravel, gets deposited at the edge, and then the waters filled with muds, the muds just stay up for days to weeks in the waters in suspension and slowly settle out on the floodplains away from the actual river channel during a flood. That's a bridge for scale. That's such a cool place. It's out in Washington. All right. So the Devonian period, it's one of the most important periods in the geologic time, at least since the beginning of animal life about 600 million years ago. Um, Even into a little bit of time, I'm talking as a geologist, maybe 50, 100 million years before the Devonian period, basically landscapes on the Earth's surface all looked like desert because there was no vegetation yet. Vegetation evolved out of seaweeds, out of pond weeds, and things like that. And so there was no life living on land until you're moving towards the Devonian period. And the Devonian period is when life really colonized the land. And in the Catskills, we have, at this time, it will not stay that way, the oldest known fossil forest in the world, and have had that for over 100 years now. Okay, a little about plant life during the Devonian period, because this is one of the great revolutions, one of the great migrations of life onto land. In the beginning part of the Devonian and the what we call the Silurian period before that, before 420 million years ago, um, all plants, well, through the Devonian till the very end, all of the plants were spore bearing, like ferns are. There were no seeds until the late part of the Devonian that we've found, at least. All the plants at the beginning of the Devonian were at most basically the reach. If you stretch your index finger and your thumb as far apart as you can, that would be essentially the height of the tallest plants when you start into the Devonian period. You can see here a small reconstruction of one, and it's much like this modern day Celotum, but it's not thought that the modern day Celotum, I have several in my office growing, um, it's not thought that these evolved out of these very early land plants right there. Other things that happen important in the plant life, and remember, the highest thing at the tallest plants were about the reach between your thumb and your fingers. But by about 30, oh, and then about 10 million years later, I can't see the top of the screen here. 10 million years later was the first woody structure had evolved so that plants could grow taller and be supported and not just be knocked over easily by winds, storms, etc., etc. Um, However, by about 30 million years after this, about 390 million years, you began to have tree-like features, eventually evolving into true trees in the middle part of the Devonian. By the time of even earlier than the famous now Cairo quarry. And by about 50 million years later, near the end of the Devonian, still 10 million years to go, you had your first seeds. And this is a seed pod from a site in northern Pennsylvania. A paleobotanist, someone who studies ancient plants, found 5 of these in about an hour and a half in this outcrop. And this is what the fossil looked like. That's the edge of a penny, pretty small. But this is a reconstruction of it. And inside of these places here, you would have the first seeds that had ever evolved and grown and reproduced on the planet Earth. All right, in the ancient Catskill forests, and this includes in our Schoharie Watershed, that is a fossil there that was dug out over 2 weeks in the Catskills. And it was the first complete tree of its kind ever dug out in where you could see the bottom to the top. So that's the fossil. This is a reconstruction of it. Right here, it's about 26, 29 feet tall. This is just an artist's reconstruction of it. This is a tree that we call Eospermatopterus. This is the famous Gilboa trees that you see the stumps of, like down here where the trunk is getting bigger and bigger, and then it really turns in sometimes into a real bulb down at the bottom with roots extending, finger-like roots extending out of the bottom. And you can see a few of these finger-like roots extending out, not like our modern roots we think of. All right, that top of this tree here, this is the top of this tree, this type of tree that was uncovered from the same site. And you can this, see this scaly this scaly texture through here. This is no relation whatsoever to a palm tree, but the structure of this tree is very much like a palm. It has frond-like leaves sticking out. Here's one that was falling off. Now, this tree was laying flat. It had got knocked over in a storm or something. So this is where the fronds are. This is where fronds were, but the attachments, that's the attachment scars where they were, but they have fallen off by this time. This is a representation shown right here, idealized. And from the bottom to the top of this fossil, and it goes a little higher than the screen that I can see anyway, was about 4.5 feet, 1.35 meters from bottom. That would have been right about there on this tree fossil to the top up there. Big trees. The whole thing was 26, I think 29 feet tall is more accurate. Okay, but anyway. All right. Now here is some of these rocks. They are red rocks. They're obviously resistant because that ledge is sticking up a little bit. It hasn't all been like shale, just breaking down. But see the kind of more reddish lines coming down, mostly going down, but sometimes going out to the sides some. That those are where roots of trees were in the Catskills. Again, this is from our watershed we're talking about here, from a site. And this was a soil surface up here. And then this is where roots of trees were penetrating down. As the roots rotted away, it left holes, it left the gaps, and rain would bring red muds down through where the roots had rotted out. So we can see where the roots were, but it's been filled in with red clays in this kind of sandy, muddy layer. Not a pure sandstone, and with a little bit of mud in it, it actually ended up like this. This is a fossil soil. Okay, ancient soils. Beneath the trees, that's where the roots were. Sometimes they spread out laterally, sometimes they would spread down. And this is what we already talked about right here. The lumpy textures you see, I grew up in Iowa and I still never knew what dirt clods were. But yeah, the texture that's kind of lumpy there, those are dirt clods, like we find in soils. Plants fossils are not uncommonly found in the Catskills, but most of them look like this. Just real scrappy materials. This is a branch, a good sized branch. That's a pencil for scale. But not very good fossils. Not very good fossils there. That's what you most often would find. Um, this upper one here might not be a branch, but may be the trunk of a small tree. But they've all been tipped over, maybe transported by water some. Down in the lower right here, you see red soils, red paleosols, fossil soils, and you see that this greenish material, these lines here, well, that's where roots were, and the roots cause the red color to turn green. A matter of iron where it's rusted or oxidized more technically, or where it's been reduced. The iron in the sediments in those days, as the roots decayed, they turned the where the roots were green. It doesn't always happen that way, but you can see some of that in a number of places on Catskill Creek, where I was today most of the day. You see some of that. All right. And then here is a branch. I don't seem to have something in there for scale, but that's the black is carbonized wood. If it had gone further, it would have made coal. But that's a branch I don't remember or a medium-sized trunk. All right. The Gilboa Forest in the Schoharie Creek watershed, just a little north of Gilboa and the reservoir. It's so well known. It was the oldest known fossil forest for about 100 years until, oops, I didn't get attacked when I talked about this at the Gilboa Museum. But I'm the one who made the initial find of the Cairo forest down near Cairo in the valley. That's about 2 to 3 million years older than the old Gilboa forest. Anyway, again, here is our reconstruction right here of an Eospermatopterus tree. It was a very primitive tree. Here is one of the classic stumps that's on exhibit up at Gilboa. And that stump right there, see how it's like a big bulb down there? That bulb would have sat in this crater. This is from the Schoharie, uh, below the Schoharie Dam at the old Riverside Quarry. And this looks like a crater of some kind. Well, that bulbous base sat down inside there, and then it had finger-like roots going out in all directions and down into the Paleosol below it. Okay, and this is a view of the Gilboa Forest floor in the old um, Riverside Quarry, where they took all the big blocks out to help build the dam 100 years back. But in 2010, they basically took all the rock out of here, and there's one of those craters right there. There's one too that's a little deformed. There are other places where other trees stood, three types of trees at Gilboa. And this is a map that was made by the paleobotany crew, the people studying the ancient forests, in this case at the Gilboa Riverside Quarry. And you can see different trees. All of these round objects here is where the Eospermatopterus trees sat. And then there's some other things that are linear type features. And anyway, that's a map of the Gilboa floor. So, and that's just a close-up of the same thing. This is Linda Hernick from Rensselaerville, rural Rensselaerville, and a couple of the other scientists. They were able to invite some of us to come see this site. That's me standing there talking to Linda there, and there is one of those craters where an Eospermatops stood. And there's a close-up of two of them right there. And again, from the Riverside Quarry, and there's one of the stumps from up above, and it's very easy to imagine how that stump sat in that crater, and that stump, that type of stump, sorry, would have sat in that crater also. And this is a sketch of the Gilboa Forest by Frank Manlini, who was a technician in paleontology, retired last year. But this is a sketch of him. He was also the person who dug out that long 26, 29-foot tall Eospermatopterus tree from a quarry. And it was in more than 1,000 pieces. A master abstract jigsaw puzzle worker. He was able to put it back together at the museum with all the pieces in the right place. All right, on land at this time, and again, downstream of the Schoharie Reservoir, very important finds down there, not only going down into the marine section that's down the valley further, um, but also down here. These are what I'm going to show you are small arthropods that lived on land at this time. They hadn't been there, maybe a few in the very earliest Devonian, but again, the Devonian was the time when life migrated onto the surface of the earth. All right. And again, these would be very small. This is two fossil centipedes. They take the rocks. There's a type of acid that will dissolve the rock but not affect organic material like skin, like in this case, the exoskeletons, the material on the outside of different small centipedes. There's a mite, a fossil mite right there with hairs coming off it. These are very, very, very small. Remember that. This is something ferocious, and that's not even, it's actually about 6 feet between the jaws there. No, I'm kidding. It's another very, very small arthropod, but looks pretty frightening. And this one was named the Angry Dragon. It's pretty tense looking, but very, very, very small. And even in the Middle Devonian here, around Gilboa, about 385, 383 million years ago, there were even spiders. And this is a part of a spider right here. All right, in the rivers, there were fish. And there's a reconstruction. We see over here a good sized fish right there. And then there's the water line, and you can see some forests in the side and some smaller shrubby plants in the greens over here. And there is, from the late Devonian, that would be an early tetrapod, as we call them. You and I are tetrapods too. We have 4 legs. We just stand on 2 of them. But yeah, that would be a very early amphibian, but not found in rocks this age yet. They appeared later. Devonian period, sometimes called the Age of Fishes. Here is one of the most fascinating fish to me from the time. This is a fossil. This doesn't come from New York. This is fully preserved. This is the head. These are the fins coming out. This is where the abdomen would be. And all of it, top and bottom, would be covered by bony armor like this. And then skin would be exposed out here in the tail section. Bothriollepis. I love these fish. They're my favorites. Um, Maybe favorites even compared to nowadays. Here is something very different. This is a fossil that back in the late 1980s, when I started working at the State Museum while I was getting my undergrad degree down at New Paltz. This is a fossil. Here's the skull. Here are the scales going back. This is not one of these armored fishes, This is different. And here's a fin coming off, looking like a more normal fish. Here's where spines would be with the upper fins up there. This is a lungfish. Again, this one, like the Bothriolepis up above, the Scamanacea, come from an exquisite preservation site out on the peninsula sticking out from Quebec, up in eastern Quebec. And there's a reconstruction of one of these Scamanacea lungfish. Lungfish, when it would dry up in the rivers, in this Catskills region, when it was just lowlands, sometimes it would dry out during a drought, and the lungfish would burrow down into the sediments to get like to the bottom of the sandstones because water doesn't penetrate through muds, but they could burrow down through the sands to get to the muds, and that would be where the most likely they would get water. There's more to talk about those lungfish, but we'll move on. There were other fish too. And also, Earth's oldest freshwater clams are found in Middle Devonian waters, and you do find them in the Catskills. They're the first freshwater clams, and they are the ancestors to all the freshwater clams that we find in New York's waters and around the world. All right, keeping going. And now seeing the lake, the layers of rock beneath the trees. All of you, you live or you visit the Catskills region. How often do you get to see the rocks away from like uh, some parts of the mountainsides or going up Platte Clove or Catskill Clove? Actually, one time, me and Danny Davis, who's here tonight, who's going to give the talk next week on the modern streams, and Bob Titus, the Catskill geologist, who writes for the public. I'm the Catskill geologist researcher who's digging out new stories and new information. Um, the three of us went from the bottom of Platte Clove to the top of Platte Clove. Wow, what a day that was. What a day. Anyway, here's a typical view. This is from Blueberry Point over here, looking at the Devil's Path Ridge over here. And we're going to see some very different images of this ridge in a few minutes. So, one of the frustrating things for me as the Catskill geologist who's trying to finally put a deeper picture, a deeper understanding of the Catskills rocks. The geology of the Catskills is still one of the great frontiers of New York geology. Right there, what we see is the big issue. The forests and the thin soils that cover the slopes. And as we go into the Western Catskills, where things are not as high and rugged, then, still the forests and sometimes flatlands, they hide so much of the rocks of the Catskills. All right. Well, what? What is this? Is this a cartoon somebody drew? No, it's not. In fact, does anybody recognize that place? We'll see more of it in a moment. All right, so back to this. What I have been working on and trying is to find things to correlate rock layers from place to place in the mountains. And I thought I could go up there because I did so well in the marine rocks from the Devonian, the lower and middle Devonian. There were some layers that were like volcanic ash layers from big eruptions, explosive eruptions out in the mountains in New England and up and down that mountain belt. Some of those ash layers I could find from Western New York to Eastern New York, down into Pennsylvania, down into the Virginias, and even in Central Ohio. I'm not going to go into that any deeper, but those layers were event layers that happened over a day or over a couple weeks at most. They are timelines. And if you can recognize that this one here is the same as this one here, the same as this one here, and even in other states, then you are right at a timeline that occurred in a few days to a few weeks in this deep past. But that's another talk sometime, perhaps. There's a new tool that can be used now. This is called LiDAR. And LiDAR stands for light detection and ranging. It's a remote sensing, as you can read there, a remote sensing method that uses light in the form of a pulsed laser to measure distances, variable distance, from a plane going over down to the Earth. And what do you know? These lasers penetrate through the forest cover now. They didn't at first, but now they do, and penetrate through the thin soils on the slopes of the mountainsides. Wow. Same image as we looked at uh, in the previous slide. But anyway, LiDAR. Nowadays, not only is it looking down from the side, you get 3D LiDAR, so you can rotate your view down, like in Google Earth, and look at the sides of the mountains. And the LiDAR imagery that permits, come on, that permits you to see the rock layers. And the very last slide will be tremendous in that way. But along the way, we'll see some of this. Some bedrock layers, you can see some of the layers, and you'll see them good in some slides coming ahead. Some of these layers now, you can trace them from mountain to mountain to mountain through the Catskills. All right, for the first time, you can actually see the rocks hidden as rock layers in the Catskills that only occasionally, rarely can you see them. And again, you can follow the same layers sometimes from mountain to mountain. All right, what are you looking at? Have you ever seen this mountainside? Hmm? Hint, hint. A, we're looking from the northeast. Oh, or you could look up here in the corner and you'll know that it's Hunter Mountain. That is a Google Earth image looking from the side at Hunter Mountain. Here are the ski slopes over here on the edge. Over here would be the, anyway, but way off the screen there would be Stony Clove. All right. So I'm going to walk us through some different images. This is a partial image showing the Google Earth image you would see, okay? But over here is where, continuing up Hunter Mountain, you can see some of the LiDAR images of it, and you can see some of the layers. Now, this is not as detailed as what we're going to see next. This again is Hunter Mountain. And importantly, we're looking at 3 times vertical exaggeration. I can pick out the details better if they're spread apart. Look up here. See that layer? You can follow it all across the mountain. And this layer, you can follow it a good ways across the mountain. This one comes across here. And that one matches with this one. This one seems to match with this one. But I'm this is something I'm getting started on. And but I've some of the U.S. Geological Survey geologists have gone deeply in this, more towards the western edge of the Catskills and along the southern tier. But yeah, this is my coming years of research and then going out and field checking things to see what does this really look like? Look at how the layers are bending down through here and how it's kind of curly here where it's very flat across here. Maybe this is a distortion because I'm not using a high-tech computer program to work with this, but using Google Earth. But anyway, yeah, this is Stony Clove. All right, next image. What are you looking at? This is in our watershed. one long mountain, one big bumpy mountain, and one mountain with two peaks. Probably most everyone knows by this time. Some of you won't, some will. Again, 3 times vertical exaggeration. I use this fakeness so I can make out the details better. This is Plateau Mountain. Stony Clove would be right to our right here out of sight. It's coming down to Stony Clove down this slope right here. Um, Over to its left there is Sugarloaf Mountain, and that is Twin Mountain. And look at it, except where the sediments are very thick, you can't see the rocks, or sometimes not very well, but up through here you can see all the layers of the rocks. No one has ever seen the Catskills like this unless they had perhaps jumped into a time machine and went back to the time when the glacial ice had first retreated from the Catskills. But at this point, we don't have any time machines. Maybe you could make a deal with the devil to go back in time and look at it like, the devil teaching how to play the blues in the South in the old days. I'm not sure that would be a very good deal, though. All right. Again, what do you see? You see the mountainsides. You can see the layers. There are layers that you can follow mountain to mountain. Right here, this one is this one is this one right here. Coming across there, in this case from Indian Head Mountain. Come on, you're supposed to show things. Anyway, from Indian Head Mountain to Twin Mountain to Sugarloaf to the east side, the eastern edges of Plateau Mountain. Look at that. None of us have ever seen the Catskills like this until some of the geologists and maybe geographers too started looking at this. So this is new, and we can see. And oh, I should just point out the ledges that stick out, like in that early image, that photo, the ledges that stick out and sometimes are very thick. And we'll see this very good in a few minutes. That's the sandstones. The places in between is where it's dominantly muds, and those are the floodplains, the smooth areas that are a little bit recessed under the ledges that stick out more. Sandstone. There's floodplain, river channel, floodplain, river channel, floodplain, river channel, floodplain, etc. Ah, to me, it's just amazing. There's Twin and Indian Head and Plateau and Sugarloaf there. All right, we're going to take a different view here. We're going to move a little to the east of where we're at here. Again, do you recognize what you're seeing? I think you probably do. We can see out here in here, the LiDAR imagery is not shown. You can see these layers here that are resistant, that are sometimes covered by modern soils and stuff, or sediments coming out of that narrow little place. This is the Catskill Escarpment. And this is our ridge of the Devil's Path, starting at Plattekill Mountain. This is Platte Clove. This is Catskill Clove, and this is Catskill High Peak. You can see the ledges sometimes are these are the sandstones again. Sometimes they're not so continuous. Sometimes they're very continuous along here. So again, these bright spots are where you have river channels. There might be some mixed in here at lower resolution, but this is a lot of floodplains, and this would be where the river channels were about 385, 84 million years ago. The whole thing of the ages, that are the numeric ages that I'm telling you about, that I should talk about in another talk, in some other series or some other situation. talk about the volcanism in the Acadian mountain belt, the old Appalachians, out to the east and things like that. All right. Um, this is there for three times vertical exaggeration once again. All right. Well, Catskill High Peak, Platte Clove, Catskill Clove. This is really my favorite image of all of this. It's this and the limestones that start west of Catskill, along with the shales and sandstones of the Hugelberg Ridge, that's between the Catskill Escarpment and where you find the limestones near Catskill. Look at here. That is a very thick sandstone. For some reason, the river channels stayed there for a long time, stacking channel upon channel upon channel upon channel in that situation. Up here, this is where it's floodplain deposits, where it's not sticking out and showing so rugged. But here are where river channels migrated through here, but then disappeared off to the side as they either went back into the mountain further now or extended out this way. Remember, all of these are sedimentary rocks, and the layers extend through the rocks side to side. Um, and after they were deposited at some point, they were cemented together to form rock, but they were all loose sediments already. See this feature right here? For those of you who might know the southeast, know the east, yeah, the south-southeast side of Overlook Mountain, that's what you're looking at here. The peak is up here. This is one of the mountains back along our ridge that has the Devil's Path over it. That's off in the distance behind. This is Side Mountain. So we talked about, I pointed out this, that it was a thick succession of sandstone. Look at this pile here and this pile here. And over here, another pile of things. It's not like a continuous layer, and another pile. I haven't seen these yet, but I think maybe those are the same conglomerates, perhaps, that you would see at North-South Lake, north and south mountains as you go up the trails. This is the quarry. And I lived over here as a young musician for about a dozen years, anywhere from West Hurley, actually south of the reservoir, out to Overlook Mountain, and young trombone player. And it was living around here, seeing the rocks, driving by them, and also going to the library and taking out a book from 1944 of the geology of this region. I could get in my car and go start looking at things. I never could see anything like we see in this image, except, a little bit in Catskill and Platte Cloves. But yeah. This is a refined LiDAR image, so we can see much more detail, more better than the other ones. Thank you. That's the end of my talk. I hope you found it interesting. This is stuff that I really love, really dig.
Thank you so much, Chuck. That was awesome. Really always so cool to hear you talk and your yes, fantastic talk. You're getting a lot of applause here. Someone said this is awesome. Yes, really appreciate your enthusiasm and your curiosity. So awesome and so important. Um, we did have a few questions roll through if you are okay with taking those.
Um, yes, that's fine.
Cool.
Anybody who wants to step out, I know sometimes various things going on in an evening. Um,
Yeah. We
you'll
had
get a 0 on the quiz though.
yeah. Yeah. We did a few people have dropped off, but yeah, as
Yeah,
folks see fit,
that's just
they're
fine.
welcome to leave.
Yep.
Um, the first question that came in, are the Catskills part of the Appalachians? If not, are there any mountains in New York State part of the Appalachians?
Um, the Catskills are not part of the Appalachian Mountains. They are part of what's called the Appalachian Plateau, which is a flatter land. It's, a mountain. Oh, Danny Davis could tell us a lot about what is a mountain and what isn't a mountain. He did a very good article on that. Are the Catskills mountains? Or do we not call them mountains because it's really like taking a book and taking one of those sharp knife things with the blades and cutting down through the pages of the book? Because if you look right there on this view, I mean, those are all like pages of a book stacked on top of each other. And what's happened to form the Catskills is the activity, most all of it from the erosion from water. There used to be 3 miles of rock, 2.5 to 3 miles of rock on top of the Catskills. But it's been eroded away from the top of Slide Mountain. But anyway, so this is really what's called the Appalachian Plateau that goes all the way up to Thatcher Park, west of Albany, and then extends down through New York, and out western in New York, down through the states of Virginia, West Virginia, Maryland, etc., Pennsylvania. The Appalachian Mountains are a different thing. That is where the mountain belt, the collision of two continents, formed a big mountain. The rocks are deformed. They've been under heat and pressure and turned into other kinds of rocks. And that's truly what anyone and everyone would call a mountain belt. And the Appalachian Mountains are actually the result of the collision three different times where there were collisions of smaller continents or chains of volcanic islands colliding with Eastern North America. So anyway, yes, what we have in the Catskills is not the Appalachian Mountains. You would go over into the mountains on the on the Massachusetts border from here into the Taconic Mountains and then extending from there almost to Boston. That would be the Appalachian Mountains. All right,
Wonderful.
long-winded, sorry.
No, that's great. Thank
Yeah.
you. Thorough. All right, the next question that came through, I think I might know the answer to this one, but I'm gonna let you respond. Did Chuck say we have the oldest fossil forests, but it won't stay that way? Why wouldn't it stay that way?
Ah, for about 100 years, for about 100 years, the Gilboa sites, and there's actually about 5 different levels with the tree stumps and forests around Gilboa. So 5 different forests, at least there were probably more. But anyway, so for about 100 years, the famous forest that was found at the dam site and along the reservoir area there, um, that was the oldest known fossil forest in the world. When I walked across the floor of the Cairo quarry, which is about 2 to 3 million years older, and we found that there was a whole forest floor. You don't see trees standing, you don't have stumps there. It's just the impressions of the roots of 3 different types of trees there. The only type of tree that shares with the Gilboa forest is the Eospermatopterus. But um, anyway, so I have seen where trees were rooted in older um, rocks in the Hudson Valley, like down by Kingston or up by Rensselaerville. Those are in rock layers they were deposited on land, but lower in the stack of pages, like we see right through here, lower in the stacks than even what we see here. Um, and so where there's a tree, the impression of a tree, um, where a tree actually sat, and you had the impression of where the tree roots were and things like that, then you know that yes, there were older forests than that. But none of them are really, we don't see much extension of them like the Riverside Quarry when they opened it up again, we saw pictures of, or the Cairo Quarry, where you can see 0 to 70 yards on an American football field has been mapped where each individual tree stood in that forest. Um, you just found a log in the rocks, well, that log or a plant fossil, there are trees fossils out in black deep water shales in western New York. By deep, I mean a few 100 feet, 200, 300, maybe at most 400 feet deep. But that was nowhere part of a forest. That was carried out, like happens with wood, carried out on the surface until it gets waterlogged and then it sinks to the bottom. So you really have to find where a tree stood and the roots went out from it. Anyway, did that
So
answer the question?
more discoveries to be made.
Yeah, more discoveries to be made. Actually, a paper came out early last year about some new forests found on the west coast of England. Um, And so I wrote to the authors, and it was older. It was the age of marine rocks out by Catskill. Um, I wrote to the two authors. One of them I know well, um, and he's worked on both of these forests. He's from the UK. When I talked to them and him and the lead author through email, they said, "Well, these are only about 2 meters thick, 2 meters tall, so a bit taller than any of us listening right here and talking." And so they admitted, well, these are more like proto trees. And so then those were more like proto-forests, so not really fully developed trees yet,
Mm,
so not true forests yet. Yeah.
gotcha. Well,
Long-winded. I am known for
no,
being thorough. Sorry if
thorough.
I'm boring you. Yeah.
No, never boring. Okay, so the next question was, you mentioned Blueberry Point. Did you mean Huckleberry Point in Elder
Oh,
Park in the
yes.
Catskills? Okay,
Huckleberry. I'm sorry. Yep,
all
yep.
right, cool.
Yeah.
Huckleberry Point, got it. Then the next question that came in, sorry, I'm just trying to deliver these in the order they came in. Um, how did the conglomerate rocks form in the North-South Lake area?
Yes. That's something I've certainly spent a good amount of time thinking about. And those conglomerates, um, there are conglomerates like that also found going up Plattekill Mountain in Indian Head. You don't find much in the way of conglomerates below there in the rocks, in and you don't find conglomerates very much in the rocks above them for quite some thickness. This is some significant event that carried gravel so far out into the Hudson, into the Catskill Escarpment. Um, there are a couple ways that could happen. It could be that, and this would be a complicated discussion. I'll just tell you the different things. But anyway, it could be because sea level was changing all through Devonian, just like now, and not necessarily from human activities, but certainly that's increased it. It seems. I'll just say it that way so I don't get in trouble. But anyway, sea level could have fallen. And when sea level would fall, things that were more up, you remember that alluvial plain where it's sediments coming down from the mountain? Whoops, I'm out of the screen. There we go. So it could be that if sea level dropped out to the west, then whatever was at higher elevations up the alluvial plain coming down to the seaway, down to the coast, um, it could be that gravel was able to be carried farther to the west. Another thing that could happen was if there was a significant climate change that led to a much wetter climate. But at that scale of time for those conglomerates, in fact, those two conglomerates are just the thick beds that you would see on South Mountain. There are thinner ones that go down to nothing, and thinner ones that get thinner as they go up the mountainside too. So you know that the two big conglomerates we see are the peak of these events, bringing gravel down. Anyway, the other thing that could happen was if there was a big pulse in building the mountains higher. But the fact that it's all restricted within a few hundred feet, not only the two thick ones, but the thinner ones below and above, that doesn't seem likely.
Yeah,
Sorry,
thank you.
complicated stuff. I didn't even begin to touch on it.
Well, thank you so much. So I think we have four more questions, and I think that we'll call it at that. Does that sound
Sure,
good?
sure.
Cool. All right. So first, where did the deposits of sand and mud come from? And I think this person asked this somewhere else. So let me just get the full question. Oh, what is the origin of deposits of sand and mud? Question mark. Bigger mountains? Question mark.
Um, it's all from the erosion of the mountains as they're building up. Always up in those mountains, there's rocks are being broken into smaller pieces and smaller pieces and smaller pieces, going from humongous, huge things beyond boulder size to boulder size, and breaking down to gravel size, breaking down to grinding them down, etc., to sand size. And then some minerals will actually alter from being the hard pieces of rock, like sand still is, will alter to muds. And all of that is being carried down from the mountains by the rivers. And so rivers are not going to be, tens of miles wide. I don't know how wide some of those rivers would be, but there would always be a river and then usually quite a distance between the two rivers that might be the next ones to the side from it. And so the rivers are carrying the sand down and depositing some of it in the river channels, but some of it carrying it out to the shoreline and depositing out there. And the muds would be coming down out of the mountains, and some of it would be distributed out on the floodplains adjacent to it when there were big floods, spring floods, things like that, or rainy seasons versus dry seasons. And some of the mud, of course, would certainly be carried out to the seaway also.
Wow. Yeah, Danny said bridge estimated 100 to 1,000 feet wide for the rivers and 6 to 23 feet deep.
Mm,
Just in
hmm.
Danny's addition there.
Thank you, Danny. I didn't know that.
Um,
Good.
and then how do lungfish fit into the evolutionary story of animals moving from the ocean to land, i.e., fish developing lungs and becoming amphibians? Are lungfish related to amphibians?
No, lungfish are not on the lineage to the what became the amphibians, which then also evolved out of them into the reptiles, and out of the reptiles evolved the mammals. So they're not in the same lineage. They evolved the capability of breathing air so they could get up out of the water or otherwise. But it was the group of fishes from the Devonian that had bony fins instead of the soft fins like we think of with most fish. But there's a lineage of fish that have bony um, fins. The fins are inside instead of the really soft, floppy material that gives the fins some bit of strength and structure to control. So out of those fish that had the bony fins, that's where the first amphibians evolved out of. Um, yeah, hopefully that was a reasonable answer for
I think so, but Doug is welcome to follow up uh, if it wasn't. Danny had a question. Can you talk about how we get repeating sequences of floodplain and river sediments stacked on top of each other?
Yeah. The rivers, as they're coming down out of the mountains. Sorry, let me get to, oh yeah, I keep trying to point to my picture instead of the lens there. As they come down out of the mountains, and they get out to these flats, they are depositing more and more sand in the channel. And what happens is the channel ends up being at filling up with sediments and being higher than the ground to the sides of it out on the floodplain. So during some floods, the rivers will break through the sides of the channel and will spread out onto lower elevation areas out on the floodplains. When there's a flood, you're going to say if you've got gravel in it, the gravels might be pushed out by the water flooding out of the channel. That won't go very far. It will drop very quickly. And I saw that in extreme way up in the Alberta Rocky Mountains. But then even the sand will spread out a little ways from the channel before it all settles out. The muds will go out for long distances before they settle out, and sometimes weeks for that to happen. But anyway, that means that eventually the farther out on the floodplains are going to be lower elevation than at and around the channel, the river channel flowing. So then some flood comes along and it breaks through those sides that stick up the levees, natural levees on a river, and the river just starts flowing down into the lower elevations on the floodplains, and they just migrate back and forth over long periods of time. I grew up in Iowa, so I know about rivers in kind of flatlands, and they have these floodplains and they meander. When you have a meandering type of river, they will. I have some great pictures, but I couldn't put them in this talk. I had it in another talk. Anyway, so that kind of explains it. The rivers are migrating back and forth, always flowing down into the lower areas, and then what was once the river channel becomes part of a floodplain. Yeah.
Excellent. Thanks. And then last question here. What would you say is the closest living modern day relative to those Gilboa trees?
Ah, yes, the Gilboa trees, the Eospermatopterus. There are no descendants of that. That whole lineage of those types of trees, including the Eospermatopterus, went extinct by the end of the Devonian. The types of trees that we see, the big long roots that extend out in the Caro Quarry, um, those are the ancestors of the modern conifer trees and their relatives. And then there's another type of tree at the Cairo quarry, and that is a relative of the modern day lycopsids that I see in my forest that you see all through the Catskills. Some of them look like little Christmas trees. That the tallest one that we see on our land out here in the Helderbergs is about tallest one would be from my real chin, not this thing that I started growing over a year ago, but would be about this tall. So about 9 inches, maybe something in height. That's the tallest one I've seen. But some of them look like little Christmas trees. So they're lycopsids, and there's three types that are very abundant in the forest, in the Catskills, in the Helderbergs, et cetera, et cetera. Um, so
Where do
those obviously
horsetails
left descendants. Yeah, go ahead.
where do horsetails kind of land in that mix? Are they descendants of any of the species that were around in the Devonian or no?
Start it again. I
Like
couldn't understand.
horsetails?
Horsetails. Oh,
Yeah.
yes. Horsetails evolved in the Devonian period too. And actually, the lycopsid trees, like our little ground pine nowadays that
Hmm.
we see in the forest, um, the lycopsids, the horsetails, um, and another group grew to be 90 or over 100 feet tall in the time after the Devonian during the Carboniferous period. And that is a lot of what made the big coal swamps that produced the coal for the big change about 200 years ago into the industrial age, burning the coal. When I was a
Oh,
kid, my grandma DeCoster out in rural Iowa on the farm, she still used coal to heat the house. Yeah.
wow.
Anyway, yeah, right. That
Cool.
was in, the 60s.
Yeah. Well, those were all of the questions. We didn't have any more come in. And yes, just getting a lot of thank yous and praise here. People are excited to go out and explore. And that's really, I mean, what I was hoping for in inviting you to speak. So thank you so much for making it
Oh,
happen. Really
thank you
appreciate
again
it.
for the invitation. Thanks you
Yes.
again,
We'll have
Amanda,
to
for
do
the
it again
opportunity.
sometime.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And I've been giving a lot of these talks, different places and stuff. I'm going to start stretching out into some of the other stories, like the volcanic ash stories. I mean, some of these volcanic ashes from the Appalachians during the Devonian, some of that volcanic ash got carried even west of today's Mississippi River. Tremendous super eruptions, like we think of with Yellowstone, or we think of with the area around Naples, Florida.
Is there like a seam of volcanic ash? I think around Catskill or
Yes, there are
okay.
there Yes. Around Catskill,
Cool.
there's some in the limestones that you drive through on Route 23.
Hmm.
If you take 23A, and there's a place you go down, and there's what's the old exit of the thruway that ended at Catskill at some point. In an outcrop on the south side of 23A, you can see the rocks standing tall, and you can see some brownish layers in the interval that's all folded like an accordion. Um, yeah, like the accordion bellows. Anyway,
Yeah. Um, awesome. Yeah, I remember going on a geology field trip and seeing some of that
ah,
back a while ago with
yeah,
Alex Bartholomew. Um,
yes, little brother.
so some folks are asking if they can be notified about future events. We will certainly be letting folks know anytime we're collaborating with you, but is there a good way to kind of tap into um, your event calendar directly, I guess? Or
I've never done that. Um,
well, if you need an event coordinator,
well, I started to think that, yeah, I perhaps not only
gotta,
depend on the museum,
right.
but because the museum wants to start being co-sponsors on events like this.
Oh, good.
Yeah, but I'm also thinking of maybe starting up a web page um, that I can post things like that on there. And also, I'm a musician, so I play out some more than I used to. I
I'm
have
sure
two
folks
gigs
would be
over the
excited
weekend.
to see your music too. So,
Yeah, well, some of it's rather abstract and stuff. I do improvise music, and
cool.
it's invented on the spot with the other musicians mostly. Yeah.
Excellent.
Anyway,
Great. So, well, I will be following up with folks in email with, just information about like how to get in touch with you. Is that all right? Or,
yeah, you
um,
can just go to the New York State Museum,
mhm,
type in New York State Museum geology, and it'll
great.
take you to geology. And obviously, you will see I'm the only long-haired geologist. So, Chuck. Yep.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thanks again, Chuck. This was awesome. Thank you all for joining us tonight. I know we went a bit over, but
Yeah.
luckily not when there's so much to cover. So,
One more thing I'll say is that the field trip that I'm doing next Saturday, thanks to Amanda, um, I am building a waiting list for trips. I'm thinking I would do a summer trip and a fall trip. There would be about 35 people, maybe 40 for each trip. You can email me with your email, say you're interested in getting on the waiting list. Um,
yeah, I
that I
think that's
know.
That may be a can of worms. We have 25 people on our waiting list right now for the one
Yeah, I know.
on the
I know.
7th. So
So you should send those to me quickly.
yes, yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
definitely will.
yeah, yeah.
Great.
Anyway,
All right. All right.
everybody,
Well,
thanks for coming. And
thank
thanks for
you
your
all.
patience putting up with all the information. But yeah,
This is great. Thank you so much.
yeah.
Take care.
Bye, Amanda. Bye, Dan.
Bye.